How do you set boundaries? We're going to dive into what boundaries are, how you know your boundary, why you don't honor your boundary, and what to do when others don't honor your boundary. That's the topic of today's Soul Sovereignty and Sexuality podcast with myself, Jessica Falcon, International Soul Embodiment Guide and Relationship Coach. And boundaries are essential if you want a healthy relationship. Boundaries are essential if you want to experience freedom in your relationship. Boundaries are essential if you want to show up and be seen and loved for who you actually are, not who others want you to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation about boundaries today. Boundaries. Often people think boundary is against another person. That's not a boundary. That's defensiveness. That's putting your power outside of you. A boundary is you deciding for you what you will or will not tolerate. You deciding for you what you will or will not accept. You deciding for you what you desire or don't desire in a relationship. You're not wrong for having a boundary. You're not selfish for having a boundary. You're not unloving for having a boundary. The belief, very deeply embedded in the collective subconscious, especially in women, is that it is unloving to have a boundary because we are taught and have been acculturated to believe that love is selfless, that love demands self-sacrifice, and that love demands self-denial. And part of owning your boundary is coming into a sense of self, because a boundary arises naturally when you anchor into self, when you have a strong sense of self. Now, when I say self, what kind of self am I talking about? This is where it gets confusing. I'm not talking about the small self, what I would call the ego self. I'm talking about the big S self, which is the soul self, the divine self, the true self. When you have a strong sense of self, capital S, soul self, divine self, true self, that is self-sourcing. That is the eternal self. That is you knowing your worth, sourcing love and safety and acceptance from within. The small self, the ego self, is constantly identifying itself based on the external world, which is why it can't have boundaries, at least good or strong ones, or honor them, because it's constantly seeking permission, it's constantly seeking validation, permission. The small self, the ego self, is seeing itself only through the eyes of others. The soul self sees itself through its own eyes. The soul self has an internal knowing of who you are that is not dependent on the external world. Now, that inquiry, soul self, ego self, the transition from one to the other is part of the spiritual process. It's part of embodiment. It's part of ascension. And that's what I guide my clients to do in retreats, one-on-one work, and in our monthly Temple of Divine Feminine Power. So if you want more information on that, go to thepathtosovereignty.com. For the purposes of today's conversation, just assume that when I say self, I'm talking about the true self, the soul self. And you have to have that inner knowledge and that inner inquiry to be able to do that. So what is the boundary? The boundary is saying, this is me, that is you. I choose for me. I choose for me what I will or will not tolerate. I choose for me what I will or will not accept. I choose for me what is my yes and what is my no. In other words, you don't choose for me. I choose for me because I know me and I trust me. And I know that I am worthy of taking up space. I know that I am worthy of having what I want. I know I am worthy of saying no. That's why boundaries are very deep, energetic, and emotional work, because these are the wounds, particularly of the feminine. So how do you know what your boundary is? A boundary is not in defense of or against someone. A boundary is not a demand. A boundary is not in opposition. Nor is a boundary something that just comes from your head alone. It's not like I have this boundary that I decide is here no matter what. That's artificial boundary. It's a thought. It's a belief. A boundary is something that rises up within you based on a knowing within you, based on self-inquiry, based on self-knowledge about knowing how am I feeling? What is my truth in this moment? True boundaries arise in the moment. What am I feeling? Am I feeling open, curious? Am I feeling closed, contracted? Am I feeling expansive, leaning into something? Am I feeling like, no, that doesn't feel good or safe or trustworthy? What's your discernment? What is your yes? What are you leaning toward versus leaning away from? And these help you know your boundary, which means you have to be in tune with your body. You have to be listening to your heart to know your boundary. That contraction expansion is a really good way of determining your boundary. A boundary is saying, no, you can't talk to me that way. A boundary is saying, you don't get to choose for me. A boundary is saying, I'm placing myself equal to you, not underneath, not above, equal. Heart always looks at both equal. I'm in my choice. You get to be in your choice, which is why a boundary is not a demand. I'm in my choice. You are in your choice. So I don't demand this of you. I communicate this to you from an embodied, centered place. And I give you the opportunity to either meet me there and honor this, or let me know your own boundary. And we can be in communication around this so that we're in relationship. Both of us are seen. Both of us are heard. Both of us are honored. If you are demanding, then what you're saying is you have to do this, be this way, no matter what, or else, which is not recognizing the other person's choice and freedom and their own desire or lack thereof. They might choose to meet you. They might choose to honor the boundary, but it's a choice. This leads us into the question of why don't I honor my boundaries? So, okay, say you know you're no. You're feeling a no, your body's telling you no. This often happens even in sexual experiences and romantic relationships where somebody is wanting to do something, your body's telling you no, you're feeling a no, you're not quite ready. And do you voice it? Do you express it? Do you silence it? Do you stuff it down? Do you get in your head? Do you say, well, maybe, or I should, or they really, and you're focusing on them and what they want and what they need and how they feel, and you lose the self. That is the number one reason why boundaries aren't often acknowledged or honored by you, is that you're focused more on the external, you're focused more on the other than you are on yourself. Remember, this is not about placing yourself above people, it's about placing yourself equal to others. So you being conscious of you just as much as you're conscious of the other is what creates a healthy dynamic in relationships. What I often see, again, particularly in women, though I see this in men too, is that you will think more about or give more weight to the other person's experience than your own. That's not equal. That's not honoring you just as much as you're honoring them. One of the other big reasons when we start to get more specific about what comes up when we're not honoring a boundary is guilt. If you don't give people what they want, guilt if you don't fulfill their desires, guilt if you think of yourself, guilt if you choose for yourself, guilt if you take up space, right? This is where the emotional work comes in, because my focus of research is ancient wisdom, mythology, civilizations, to get to the root of these deeply embedded subconscious beliefs that keep us from showing up fully in relationships and experiencing freedom. And when you are feeling guilty for thinking of yourself, for example, you're not alone. This is very common. I've worked with people individually around the world or groups around the world, from Norway to Saudi Arabia to the UK to Spain, America, you name it. Like, we all have these same subconscious beliefs. And when you can identify them, you have the choice to transform them. That's what I help you do. Whether you're in the monthly Temple of Divine Feminine Power, whether you're working with me one-on-one or at a retreat, I help you transform these beliefs because you're not bound to them unless you think you are. And you're only bound to what you have not yet seen. Another reason that people often don't honor their boundaries is because they are in patterns of self-denial, which we talked about, but they fear that if I have this boundary, if I express this truth, I did another episode, by the way, on expressing truth you might want to go listen to, called How Do You Speak Your Truth? If that's a thing for you. Fear, I will be rejected. Fear, I'll be abandoned. Fear, they will judge me. All of these fears that come up. Fear of conflict is also a really big one around boundaries. And these fears, these feelings of guilt, these feelings of shame, these feelings of self-denial, they bring you into self-knowledge when you let them show you what is actually arising here within me. Is this my soul truth? And if not, how do I align to my soul truth? When you come into one of my containers, it is all about aligning to your soul truth, releasing what is not your soul truth, because that is the only path to sovereignty. One of the other big obstacles, so to speak, that I see in people around boundaries is that you want to set a boundary, you're aware of the boundary, you're looking at the reasons you haven't honored it in the past, you're getting to the root of the thought, you're getting to the root belief. And then you're still expecting other people to honor your boundaries. So what do you do? What do you do when other people don't honor your boundaries? How do you generally respond? When you say, for example, leave and the other person doesn't leave, what do you do? When you say, I have this particular boundary, and the other person says, okay, but then they don't change their behavior, what do you do? When you say, please don't interrupt me, and the person continuously interrupts you, what do you do? How do you respond to your own boundary is actually the question. Are you willing to honor it, even when they don't? Are you willing to enforce it when they don't? Are you willing to speak it when they don't want to hear it? Are you willing to act on your boundary? Are you willing to enforce it by taking the action necessary, even if that means leaving the relationship to honor your own boundary? Because I'll tell you what, particularly in toxic relationships or abusive relationships, unhealthy dynamics, codependency, what happens is if you say, here's my boundary, done the inner inquiry, I'm clear in my yes, I'm clear in my no, I'm expressing it, I'm speaking my truth, I'm creating the internal safety to do so, here's my boundary. The other person doesn't honor it and you tolerate it, which means you're not honoring your boundary. Definitely used to do this. This isn't with judgment, this is with compassion, but also accountability. What happens is the other person recognizes, consciously or unconsciously, they're not honoring their boundary. I don't have to. I can get away with it. And then the next boundary, well, they're not going to feel as much respect for it, quite frankly, because you didn't honor it last time. And then they keep pushing up, pushing up, pushing up, when it's your job to say no, when it's your job to act on it, when it's your job to honor your own boundary. Because when you honor your boundary, you're honoring yourself. A boundary is you, anchored in you, honoring you. It's an act of love. It's not an act of opposition. It's an act of love. So are you loving yourself enough to honor your boundary is the question. We're going to dive more into boundaries in the the online temple of Divine Feminine Power. If you're not already a member, you can check that out. Very accessible partial scholarships are available if the $88 a month is a stretch for you financially. You can work with me one-on-one if you want to go into soul healing, energetic healing. I have a divine activation portal. And if you want to check out a womb meditation to activate your sexual life force energy, go to thepathtosovereignty.com, sign up. You'll receive Soul Sovereignty and Sexuality podcast delivered straight to your inbox as well, so you don't miss an episode. You can also subscribe to your favorite platform, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts, let me know what this brings up for you, and I'll see you in the next episode.